Hey everyone! Today we're tackling something that's right at the heart of how software gets made. I've got our expert Beatrice here with me, and we're going to get into functional requirements. You know, the secret set of rules that really decide if an app is a joy to use or just a total headache. All right, Beatrice, let's just start with a feeling that I'm sure everyone knows. You're in an app, you're trying to do something that seems totally obvious, but it just will not cooperate. It's so frustrating. Why is that so common? Oh, it absolutely is, Alex. And 9 times out of 10, that frustration comes from that exact gap you're talking about. As a user, you have this idea in your head of how things should work, right? But the software, it only knows the literal instructions it was given. And when those two things don't line up, that's when you get that friction, that confusion. So, today, we're going to bridge that gap. We'll kick things off by looking at why software so often feels like it fails us. Then we'll really define what functional requirements are. After that, we'll see how these rules actually get written, how they impact you, the user, and finally, how they become the blueprint for success. I love that. Okay, so let's jump right into that first part. Software that fails us. Why does this happen? Why is there so often this huge disconnect between what we want and what the software actually does? You know, it really just boils down to assumptions. The user and the developer are basically living in two completely different worlds. A user just assumes something like an undo button is a given. Of course it should be there. But the developer, they can only build what they've been explicitly told to build. If add and undo function was never written down as a rule, then as far as the software is concerned, that idea just doesn't exist. Without that clear, shared rulebook, things just go wrong. Okay, that makes total sense. So what's the professional fix for this? How do you make sure the user and the developer are reading from the same playbook? Well, the solution is what we're here to talk about: clear functional requirements. Now, the formal definition is that they are statements about the services the system provides, how it reacts to inputs, and how it behaves in certain situations. But really, just think of them as the whats. They're all about what the system has to do. And a great way to understand the what is to see it next to the how. For instance, a functional requirement is a user can purchase a ticket. That's what it does. A non-functional requirement is about how well it does it, like the purchase has to be done in under 3 seconds. That's a performance quality. Both are super important, but they are two very different things. Got it. So we have these rules that spell out exactly what the software needs to do. But how do they get written down? I mean, how do you go from a big, vague idea to something a developer can actually work with? That's a fantastic question, because it's really a process of translation. You write these requirements at different levels of detail for different audiences. It usually starts high level with what we call user requirements, and these are written in just plain natural language so a customer or a user can easily get it. So, for example, if we look at this patient management system, Medcare, the user requirements are super straightforward. A user shall be able to search the appointment lists, or the system shall generate a daily list of patients. See? They describe what the user gets out of the system in language anyone can understand. But that's not nearly enough detail for the developer who has to actually build this, especially if it's a critical system where you just can't afford any mistakes. So those big, high-level ideas, they have to get broken down into incredibly precise, unambiguous instructions. We call these system requirements. And in a life-critical system like an insulin pump, that detail is everything. There can be zero room for guessing. So here you see a table that maps every possible blood sugar condition to a very specific mathematical action. You know, when a person's life depends on it, you can't just tell a developer to administer insulin. You need this level of precision. Wow. Okay, so that's it. That entire process, from that simple sentence to this incredibly complex table, that's what makes sure the software actually does what I need. It's why some apps feel like they just read your mind. Exactly. And in software engineering, that whole idea has a name. It's called validation. It's the process of constantly stopping and asking, are we building the right thing? It's not just about building the software without bugs. It's about making sure you're building the right product to begin with. This all connects back to the fundamental qualities of any good piece of software. You know, you need it to be dependable, efficient, easy to maintain, but functional requirements are most closely tied to this one idea: acceptability. And acceptability is just a way of saying the software does what the user needs it to do, in a way that makes sense to them. I mean, think about it. Software can be super fast and never crash, but if it doesn't have the functions to actually be useful, if it isn't acceptable, then it's a failure. This is really starting to feel like it might be the most important part of making software. So what's the big takeaway here? How should we really be thinking about functional requirements? You should think of them as the most important link in a chain that leads from a problem to a happy user. First, you figure out what people need. Then, you define those needs as clear requirements. You double-check or validate that those requirements are correct, and only then do you actually build the product. The requirements are the bridge connecting the user's problem to the final solution. So at the end of the day, functional requirements are so much more than just a technical to-do list for programmers. They are the actual blueprint for the entire project. They're the guarantee that what you're building is going to solve a real-world problem for a real person. And that's where their true power is. A blueprint for success. I love that. It says it all. So we want to leave you all with a question to think about. What's the one single function your favorite app just could not live without? Because you can bet that function, whatever it is, started its life as a simple, clear, functional requirement.